Hi guys, the lesson today is all about just making sure we're really tuned in and ready for the two poems that we're going to compare this week in our assessment. So really the objective today is dead straightforward. Make sure that you're ready to compare the two poems. So the plan today is to go through the table task that I set you last week and to make sure you've got that kind of done and that you know exactly what we're going to do with that table. So, first of all, I want to just draw your attention to how this table is going to work. Now, you've seen this before in a previous lesson, and hopefully you've had a good go at completing it. Now, you might have got everything filled in, you might have got a few gaps, you might have only managed to get half or even less than half. The idea today is to get this finished and for you to then start to choose which particular areas you're going to focus on. So, these areas here, down in the grey box at the side, those are the things that we're going to kind of concentrate on. Now, as you can see, there's 7 different things here. You don't need to write about 7 different things in your assessment. You only need to write about 3 or 4. There's ones you choose. It's completely up to you. You choose the ones that you feel you've got the best handle on, the ones you understand best, the ones that you think you've got the most to write about, the most interesting things to write about. So your 3 or 4 that you choose is very much down to you. Okay, the idea though today is to make sure that you've got as wide a choice as possible with enough decent ideas so you can get it right. So first of all, London, what's the main idea in William Blake's London? Well, London is a horrible place. That's the key idea. Everybody is suffering and they're miserable. That is the key idea of this poem. In contrast, the idea in Westminster Bridge is that London is incredibly beautiful. So you can see that the ideas in both these poems are opposite of each other. However, they've only got one single idea. There's not like a whole range of ideas. It's like they're both poems are trying to just hammer home one single idea about the city. When it comes to what the poet's attitude is, Blake hates London, hates the way people are forced into lives of misery, whereas Wordsworth loves this beautiful city. So you've got, again, another kind of complete opposite attitude towards the city in both these poems. On to the titles. The titles, how did they relate to the rest of the poem? Well, the title in London, basically as the poem is about the whole city, the poem is called After the City It's About, suggesting that the kind of the perspective we're getting is large, covering the whole district of London. Whereas Westminster Bridge, it's a very precise location, and not just geographically, the actual bridge, this one bridge in London, but also in terms of historically, it's a particular year and a particular date. It's September the 3rd, 1802, I think, is the full title. So the key thing here is that London by Blake is very much a general, this is what the whole of London is like, where Wordsworth is saying this precise moment, very, very precise moment, is what it was like. So they have different kind of views, and the titles kind of indicate that. First line of London expresses the idea that this poet is going on kind of a tour exploring London, and he's going to tell us and report back what he sees. There is that little echo of Daffodils by Wordsworth, you know, I wandered lonely as a cloud. That's opening line, probably the most famous one in English poetry. There's a little echo of that in Blake's opening lines, a kind of little dig or a little contrast, a little bit of sarcastic, ironic kind of use of language to kind of make the point that London is really disgusting and horrible compared to this beautiful natural scene that famous poem's about. Westminster Bridge, the first line sets up the rest. It's a statement that the rest of the poem explores in the remaining 13 lines. So it's very much like, here's a start, the rest of it just proves that that first line is true. The last line of London by Blake kind of builds towards the climax of the horrible suffering that's happening in the city. And the focus in the last line is this idea of illness and disease, and the idea of the death of marriage, the traditional context of family kind of security and love. You know, society kind of has marriage as this kind of cornerstone that keeps society working, but according to Blake, and due to the horrors and the terrible situation in London, this essential part of society is crumbling and falling apart. Whereas the last line of Westminster Bridge kind of gives the idea that London is a heart, it's a metaphorical organ that the rest of the body, England, needs to live. So you've kind of got two quite different finishing ideas. Both of them are building towards the climax. Both are kind of building to like the big idea. London, though, is about the devastation that's happening within society, whereas Westminster Bridge is kind of looking at the whole country and how much it owes towards London. So kind of big ideas in the final lines, meant to create a kind of impact on the reader as they finish the poem. London's got a rhyme pattern. It's full of broken couplets, emphasising the broken people and the suffering they face in London. Whereas Composed by Westminster Bridge has the kind of Italian sonnet rhyming pattern, the ABBA, which hopefully you remember, representing the reflection of the city in the still water of the Thames. So that kind of really beautiful use of rhyme to represent the reflection in the water. Finally, the last thing to think about here is the use of formal structure and the effect it has. Well, London, as a poem, is called a lyric. The way it's set out, everything rhymes neatly. It could be put to music. It could be a song. You can imagine it happening. So that's why it's called a lyric. It's got perfect rhyme, consistent meter, and the effect of those two things being so consistent and so perfect makes it seem like the suffering that the people are facing is fixed and permanent, like there's no change. These people's lives in London are going to continue to be horrible until someone comes in to break it up and make an impact. So the message there through the structure is that this is established, this is the way London is. It's going to need something serious to break it up and change things. With the form and structure of Westminster Bridge, it's a sonnet. It's a traditional love poem, so it makes sense for Wordsworth to use this form to express his love for the particular view he's seen, and that use of that particular form emphasises how much love the poet has for this location and this particular event, the sunrise on that morning. So I'm just going to now kind of focus on some of the quotes. So the opening line of the main idea of the poet's attitude in Westminster Bridge is that London is an incredibly beautiful city, and these are some of the quotes that kind of help link to that idea. So one of the lines is, "A sight so touching its majesty." The second one, these are in no particular order. "The city now doth like a garment wear the beauty of the morning. Never felt a calm so deep." That kind of quite emotional description there of how it makes him feel. "And all bright and glittering in the smokeless air." So in terms of the point we're trying to make here, that London is incredibly beautiful, that's the idea of the poem, and it's kind of the attitude of the poet. You could take one or two of these quotes and explore how the language has achieved that effect, how the words in those quotes creates that meaning. So for example, you could look at the word majesty and what kind of that implies about this particular view. You could talk about the simile, like a garment, wear the beauty of the morning, the image of the idea that the city has got dressed in this beautiful sunshine. You could have the very positive adjectives of bright and glittering and smokeless. That really powerful description of just the sparkling gorgeousness of the city. And you could talk about the repetition of never. Never. That sense that this is unique. Never before has this ever happened. So either of those, or any of those, I should say, could be zoomed in on to help you write about how London is an incredibly beautiful place, according to the poet. And then, in contrast, London is terrible is Blake's view of London. Okay, so some of the lines that kind of really support this idea is "Every blackening church appalls." Again, these are in no particular order. "Runs in blood down palace walls." "The mind-forged manacles I hear." And "Marks of weakness, marks of woe." So you could talk about the description here of the kind of the blackening, so things are getting rotten and going wrong. The appalls are the kind of very emotional disgusting kind of feeling that that word creates or represents. This kind of quite horrible image of blood pouring down palace walls. A powerful image of the kind of the lack of free thought or lack of imagination that the mind forged manacles, that how that phrase creates a very powerful image of chains around the kind of the brains and the minds of the people who live in London. The fact that they're mentally trapped in this city as well as physically kind of abused by it. And then the repetition of marks, the idea of the scarring or the damage that the city's created. And you've also got the use of the W here on the alliteration, weakness and woe, kind of emphasizing these negative features, the emotional trauma that the poet is describing about the people in the city. So those are a whole handful of quotes there, and some of the things that you could write about as you explore and compare the main ideas and the poet's attitudes towards the same place. First line is always worth looking at. You don't have to write about the first line, but it's always something worth considering. So in Westminster Bridge, we have the statement, "Earth has not anything to show more fair." Simple. That's what William Wordsworth is telling us. It is the best sight on earth. Whereas with Blake, you've got the kind of this calm, kind of slow start before it gets into the really harrowing and thought-provoking descriptions that he sees. You could talk about in the Blake one, the kind of use the word wander. You could talk about the idea of charter, which means mapped. So you get, I would probably go into the word wander. That kind of makes it sound quite pleasant, quite relaxed, quite chilled, where in reality it's going to basically walk through a nightmare, as he describes it. Okay, so kind of the first line doesn't really give us a clue of the horrors we're going to face with that nice kind of relaxed word wander, where the Wordsworth poem kind of gives us a sense of exactly what we're getting. We're going to be shown a very, very, very beautiful location. So you could the two poems, I should say, begin with the opening lines that kind of one is kind of really honest and open and helps you predict what's going to happen next. In Wordsworth's, where Blake is a bit more kind of creates a false sense of security, makes you think everything's going to be all right before we are shocked to see the truth in London. Last lines, well, with Wordsworth's composed upon Westminster Bridge, ends with a kind of very powerful metaphor. The mighty heart is the metaphor that's transforming London into the organ that kind of keeps the rest of the country alive. The word mighty, giving a sense of the real strength of this particular city within the country. Meanwhile, with Blake, we have these very negative words to do with illness, so blight and plague, and then we've got the kind of reference to death with the word hearse, which is the carriage used to carry a coffin. You've got a slight oxymoron here of marriage and hearse, because you don't really expect those words to go together. But as an ending, this last line kind of creates the finishing touch that Blake wants, which is that basically marriage, the cornerstone of society at the time, is being kind of decimated by the life and the horrors that London allows to happen. Both poems end with a powerful finish, something that the reader is left thinking about sometime after finishing the poem. It's like you get to these last lines, and it's like they have a real impact on the reader, which then they have to process in the time after the poem's finished. So there's this real sense of impact with these final lines. So, that's the kind of end of my quick whistle stop tour through the poems, just to make sure you got some really close ideas and focus on some of the key points. If you've got any questions about this you want to ask, just send me emails or put it into Google Classrooms, and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. Hopefully as soon as you post them. You won't have to wait too long. And we'll be doing the assessment in our next lesson. So it's the last chance for you to get any questions through. to me before you hit that assessment task. Okay, guys, take care. I look forward to seeing your questions as they come through.